If it's Monday, a dire situation inside Gaza's largest hospital as Israeli forces drive deeper into Gaza City to root out terrorists, with the State Department now calling for Hamas to vacate any medical facility that's being used as a command post. Plus, the shutdown clock is ticking down once again as Speaker Mike Johnson's new plan to avoid a government shutdown draws fire from members of both parties with just 4 days until funding runs out. And in a surprise move, Senator Tim Scott suspends his presidential campaign just 2 months out from the Iowa caucuses, as yet another Trump challenger fails to gain traction with Republican voters. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake reporting in Washington, where we're tracking the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas war, starting with a deepening humanitarian crisis. All eyes are on the Al-Shifa hospital, the biggest in Gaza, as the World Health Organization says it's, quote, not a functioning hospital anymore. After heavy bombardments and intense fighting near the hospital complex, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says 3 premature babies died over the weekend due to lack of supplies. And a hospital surgeon shared a photo of newborns who were apparently taken off incubators due to an electricity shortage and moved to a temperature-controlled operating room to keep warm. Speaking on Meet the Press yesterday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called any civilian deaths a tragedy, but again pointed to Israel's assessment that Hamas uses the hospital as its headquarters. Answering questions about the situation in Gaza during an Oval Office event this afternoon, President Biden said hospitals must be protected. But at today's White House briefing, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also said the U.S. knows, and it has been widely reported, that Hamas uses medical facilities to shield its operations.
We see plenty of open source reporting about Hamas's use of hospitals and other civilian infrastructure to store weapons, to house fighters, to engage in forms of command and control. But beyond that, I'm not in a position to speak specifically to a report about a specific hospital or a specific bunker.
According to NBC reporting, some officials say there's, quote, no reason to doubt Israel in their assessment of Al-Shifa Hospital as a Hamas facility, while other sources say the U.S. can't independently verify their claims. Meanwhile, Israel is facing growing international criticism as it continues its offensive in Gaza in response to last month's brutal Hamas terrorist attacks. The IDF says it killed Hamas's head of military intelligence and that it has conducted 4,300 strikes in Gaza since October 7th. At the same time, the Israeli military also said it opened a 7-hour humanitarian corridor for civilians to flee northern Gaza. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu defended Israel's response, saying it takes great efforts to reduce civilian casualties, while dismissing accusations from UN officials that its actions could constitute war crimes.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said just this morning that while Hamas has committed war crimes, the collective punishment by Israel of Palestinian civilians amounts also to a war crime. Can you definitively say right now that Israel is not breaking international law?
Yes, I can say that what the commissioner said is hogwash, because the main difference is, are you deliberately targeting civilians? No, we're deliberately doing everything in our power to target the terrorists, and the civilians, as happens in every legitimate war, are sometimes what are called collateral damage. That's a laundered way of saying unintended casualties. That's clearly what Israel is doing. And what clearly Hamas is doing is the opposite.
The mounting outcry over the humanitarian crisis could also have real impacts on the delicate efforts to free hostages held by Hamas. As a diplomat with knowledge of the talks tells NBC, quote, the clock is ticking. A Biden administration official tells NBC one possible deal being discussed would include the release of around 80 women and children in exchange for the release of Palestinian women and teens in Israel, but it remains unclear if any deal will succeed. Meanwhile, the U.S. conducted new strikes in eastern Syria, with the Department of Defense sharing video showing the targeting of a training facility and safe house as the Pentagon responds to a spike in attacks from Iranian-backed groups on U.S. forces. We begin now on the ground in Israel, as I'm joined by NBC's Aaron McLaughlin in Tel Aviv, and Ali Rafa is at the White House. So, Aaron, I'll start with you. Give us the latest on the status of these hospitals around Gaza today.
Well, Garrett, the status of many of these hospitals is unclear as fighting has engulfed Gaza City. We have been unable to reach many of the hospitals inside of the city, but earlier today we managed to reach a neurosurgeon inside of Al-Shifa Hospital. That is the main hospital in Gaza, where he says there's some 2,000 people, including 600 critically ill patients, and he described just this desperate situation. He said that fighting had engulfed the hospital. They couldn't leave, and critically, he said, aid could not be brought in. He said that there is a lack of food, a lack of water, a lack of medicine, and a lack of fuel. And as a result, many of those 600 patients are dying, including at least 3 babies that were born prematurely. They had to remove those babies from their incubators, taking them to another part of the hospital because of the electricity situation. He is pleading with the international community for help evacuating the hospital. Take a listen.
The current situation is extremely difficult and dangerous. You cannot even imagine, you know. It's now 4th day without electricity, without water, without communication.
How are you personally coping with this?
Personally, we are collapsing, you know. I'm not sure how many days more we will be able to survive, you know.
Now, the Israeli military says that it dropped off 300 liters of fuel at the gate of Al-Shifa Hospital. It's saying that Hamas is preventing hospital officials from getting that fuel. But hospital officials tell us that that is simply a drop in the bucket. They need 10,000 liters just to run the hospital in a single day. Now, the Israeli military also alleges that it's not directly targeting these hospitals, but they do allege that Hamas has been exploiting the hospitals for cover. And tonight, an Israeli spokesperson in a press conference unveiling evidence that they allege point to the basement of the Al-Rantisi hospital, which is a separate hospital in Gaza. They're saying that Hamas was using the basement of that hospital to house some of the hostages that were kidnapped on the October 7th attacks. We have been unable to verify that account. Meanwhile, I've been speaking to the ICRC about the possible evacuation of the hospitals. A spokesperson for the ICRC telling me that it is a desperate situation. Given the fighting, it is just simply impossible to evacuate many of these hospitals. I asked her how many of the hospitals need to be evacuated. She said she is not able to give that information at this time, but all she could say is that they are getting any number of calls from doctors, from hospital officials, from civilians begging to be evacuated, and there's very little that the ICRC can do except to remind all parties involved of the international law and the protection afforded civilians as well as hospitals. Garrett.
Erin McLaughlin, thank you. I want to go to Allie now. And Allie, Brett McGurk is now the latest administration official to be dispatched to the region. Does the White House expect he'll be able to make any progress on these hostage negotiations that have been so perilous to conduct?
Yeah, Garrett, well, that's certainly the main goal here. We know that FBI, State, Defense Department officials have been on the ground in this region since shortly after the war began, with that main goal of helping facilitate those hostage negotiation efforts, hostage relief efforts, and certainly with this news that the president's top advisor in the Middle East is going to be sent to not just Israel, but also Qatar to facilitate these conversations is a clear sign that the administration wants to see that extra push to get those efforts underway. And Qatar being, of course, the key piece to this very complicated puzzle of communicating with Hamas to be able to achieve that goal. And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said in today's press briefing that U.S. officials continue working around the clock to release these hostages. We know that one of the potential plans being discussed among administration officials to be able to do do that is potentially the release of about 80 women and children that are being held by Hamas in exchange for some women and teenagers that are being held in Israel. Officials say that this is just one option, and they're cautioning that there's no guarantee that any of this is going to work. But certainly McKirk being on the ground there is a hope that they can push this effort forward. And Garrett, it's important to note the backdrop that this comes against as we continue to see this mounting pressure campaign on the White House, on President Biden, to do more in reaction to this Israel-Hamas war. Many people calling for the president to be more explicit and to finally call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And the president has really been walking this political tightrope, trying to reassure the Jewish community of his support for Israel, while also trying not to alienate Arab and Muslim Americans as they continue to be infuriated by the images continuing to come out of Gaza. And we know that privately there are concerns among White House officials within the administration about how Israel is handling this war, about how much effort is being put into reducing the risk of innocent civilian casualties in Gaza. And officials say that that's something that they continue to press and pressure the Israeli counterparts to ensure. So some White House officials definitely concerned about how this is going to continue moving forward, especially as it relates to just global optics and public opinion, Garrett.
All right, Ali Rafa outside the White House for us tonight. Ali, thank you. I want to bring in now Bilal Saab. He's a senior fellow and director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute. Bilal, can we talk a little bit about just operationally how Hamas operates in Gaza? There's so much back and forth about these hospitals and whether they're being used on some kind of permanent basis or an ad hoc basis as command centers or, bases for Hamas in this conflict. How much that is true, and how does it impact the way that Israel has to approach this war militarily?
Well, as the United States, it's really hard for us to verify, what Israel is telling us, but we have to rely on the Israelis. We have to rely on Israeli intelligence because we do not have that kind of intelligence on the ground. We can see anything above the ground, obviously, given satellite imagery, but anything on a subterranean level, we have to rely on the Israelis. And I don't think the Israelis have any really reason to be falsifying, the truth and lying about this. But at the same time, it doesn't solve the problem, which we're all trying to solve here, of collateral damage. And how do you actually balance between going after high-value targets, senior commanders of Hamas, and reducing the loss of innocent Palestinian life? This is the dilemma that we're dealing with right now.
I mean, how important is pinpoint intelligence to doing that in a strategic way? As you're saying, if you want to really be targeted, if you want to really be focused in your operations, how much do you need the intelligence to avoid those kind of civilian casualties?
Critical, Garrett. There's nothing more critical than this variable right now. And it's imperfect, obviously. There's not, just like any other war, frankly, and especially in this kind of environment that is densely populated, that is also dealing with a subterranean element inside those tunnels. We just don't know exactly what the situation is, beneath the surface. And Israel is probably gaining more and more intelligence as it conducts its operations. It is doing, limited infiltration inside those tunnels, gaining as much intelligence as possible, coming back, sharing that intelligence with air capabilities to strike Hamas targets. But at the end of the day, you still have blind sides. You still have a lack of intelligence that's making this challenge incredibly more prominent for the Israelis. And that's why everybody's calling for a ceasefire, right? That's why everybody's calling for the ceasefire to try to get into this prisoner swap that could make things a little bit better for both sides.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the idea of the prisoner swap, the effort to get these hostages home. It's been quite some time since we've had any hostages either exchanged or released. What do you make of the administration's decision to send Brett McGurk, and how do you operate in such a politically and militarily fraught sphere trying to get these folks out?
Yeah, we have a sequencing problem here, and I'm not sure how we're going to solve it. Obviously, there are multiple parties trying to get into the situation, solution here, including the United States, the Qataris, of course, as your colleague mentioned earlier, the French, to some extent, at least, applying diplomatic pressure and calling for an end to hostilities, even if it's temporary. The sequencing problem, meaning that Israel has claimed that it has no interest in calling for a ceasefire right now because it has a concerns about Hamas using that as an opportunity to regroup, to continue its attacks against Israel. Hamas wants to see an end of hostilities immediately before it even talks about the release of more hostages. How we square that is going to require some really artful diplomacy and perhaps even some luck.
Well, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has been pretty clear that, Hamas is not going to be in control of Gaza whenever these hostilities end. But I want to play for you some of his comments to Kristen Welker yesterday and pick up with a question on the other side.
Sure.
I think that the only force right now that can guarantee that Hamas, that terrorism does not reappear and take over Gaza again is the Israeli military. So overall military responsibility will have to be in Israel. As far as the civilian management of Gaza, we need to see the following two things. Gaza has to be demilitarized and Gaza has to be de-radicalized. And I think so far we haven't seen any Palestinian force, including the Palestinian Authority, that is able to do it.
It seems to me you can demilitarize Gaza with the IDF, but it's very hard to de-radicalize people by bombing them. I mean, what's your take on what the security situation, the governmental situation might look like in Gaza when this is all said and done?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, talk about two very lofty goals, right? There's no harm in saying them. Obviously, there's a political audience behind that. But I'm not even going to talk about the de-radicalization because you are, frankly, sowing the seeds of radicalization as you continue to pummel this Palestinian population beyond Hamas, right? But even on the issue of demilitarization, we shouldn't be jumping the gun. We're nowhere near, frankly, massively degrading the capabilities of Hamas or even disarming it. We're not even talking about the risks of that regionally, right? Whether there's going to be another front that would incredibly challenge Israel's military campaign against Hamas. So no harm in mentioning those things, but at the same time, in terms of practical translation on the ground, I find it incredibly difficult to demilitarize, but also de-radicalize. This is a recipe for radicalization, frankly, not just in Palestine, but across the region. And we've seen it play out in multiple other theaters across the region.
All right, Bilal Saab, we'll have to leave another front for another day, but I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you.
No problem.
And coming up, the announcement from Tim Scott that surprised even his own campaign staff. We'll get the latest reporting on Scott's unexpected exit from 2024 and the new reaction from a top campaign official next. Plus, the former president lashing out at his political enemies with dehumanizing rhetoric that echoes some of the worst dictators of the 20th century. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We had an unexpected shakeup last night on the 2024 campaign trail with South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott ending his presidential bid just days after being one of 5 candidates on our debate stage at the GOP debate in Miami. Here's how he broke the news last night.
When I go back to Iowa, it will not be as a presidential candidate. I am suspending my campaign. I think the voters who are the most remarkable people on the planet have been really clear that they're telling me, not now, Tim. I don't think they're saying, Trey, no, but I do think they're saying not now.
Our NBC team spotted Scott at his campaign headquarters earlier today in Charleston, but he didn't answer any of our shouted questions. Scott told Fox News last night that he has no plans to endorse or serve as anyone's running mate. Now, joining me now is NBC campaign embed Nnamdi Egwuonwu. He spent the last few months following Senator Scott around the country, one of the best jobs in news. And Nnamdi, this announcement was obviously incredibly sudden. What have you been able to learn about the process behind the scenes to come to this decision?
What I can tell you, Garrett, it's a decision that only came together in the last couple of days. There had been discussions in the aftermath of the last debate about the viability of the campaign. And many in Scott's orbit saw the writing on the wall. They knew this was coming down the pike eventually. But no one predicted the format of the announcement would be during an interview on Fox News at 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening. And many people were, in fact, blindsided. So for today, Scott has spent the bulk of the day attempting to sort of pick up the pieces and talk to a staff that honestly is is still sort of shocked and has lingering questions about things like pay and health care. So, the writing was on the wall, but I don't think anyone predicted the announcement would come the way it did.
If you were going to design a Republican presidential candidate in a lab, you might end up with somebody like Tim Scott. He had the money, he has the resume, at least on paper. He had a lot of friends here in Washington, and he's from an early state. I mean, that's kind of like the jackpot if you're putting this together. Yeah. Why do you think he struggled so much to catch on with the voters?
Well, when I talk to sources close to the campaign, there's sort of two buckets. There's one bucket of sources that sort of point to leadership and feel this is a matter of an inexperienced team that at times weren't able to capitalize on momentum. Many people have pointed to the time after the Iowa State Fair, right before the first debate, when he was experiencing a slight boom in the polls, and they feel that was an opportunity he should have really hit the ground hard, and he should have, talked to every reporter he could and get his name in headlines, and that just didn't happen. But then you talk to another set of sources who say that's not really fair criticism. The issue here was an electorate that was unwilling to move on from Donald Trump. And that's something that's pretty consistent with our own polling. They say Scott has high favorabilities. Voters like him.
That's
it's
right.
just a matter of they weren't ready to have a candidate not named Donald Trump represent them in the primaries.
What do you think his future holds? He says he's not going to endorse. He says he doesn't want to be on somebody else's ticket. That's what they always say. What do you think he's going to end up doing?
Well, right now, everyone I've talked to says that's still his position. He's taking his time to make a decision. But I will say there are some sources I've talked to that say he's not closing any doors per se. But right now, the focus is on just talking to the team, getting out of the race before doors close on him, and, taking his time to make a decision about what his future will look like exactly.
He's obviously from South Carolina. What do we know about his sway there in particular? Like, if he's going to make an endorsement, does he give Haley a bigger boost if he does it there? Like, how do they think about those issues?
Well, here's what's interesting. We had our poll in another early state, Iowa, and, with him dropping out, we were able to, NBC analysis, reallocate where his support will go. And what we saw was that Trump, DeSantis, Haley, they each saw about a 2-point bump. And that's sort of indicative of what people I talked to said. Even people that really liked Tim Scott, they always pointed to a Nikki Haley as an alternative. They always talked about a DeSantis as a potential alternative. And personally, I feel lesser so, but even some pointed to Trump. One thing that Scott really sort of highlighted in his campaign is that he was different from Trump. He was the optimist, he was hopeful, he was the happy warrior. But even with that, there were people who supported him that said, we like Tim Scott. We think he's a great guy. We think he'd be an amazing running mate. But we don't know if we're ready to move on from Donald Trump. So in South Carolina, we have to see what exactly will happen. But I think it's, his supporters will go to anyone who ends up being able to take the reins away from Donald Trump.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Namni, thank you for your reporting. We will see you back on the trail soon, I am sure. Now, one of the things that was striking about Senator Tim Scott's exit from the Republican primary is that just a few days ago, he was on set with us talking about his plans to keep the campaign going through next month's debate in Alabama. Here he is with my colleagues Hallie Jackson and Tom Yamas after last week's Republican debate in Miami.
You know it was a challenge for you to make it to the debate stage here. Do you think tonight is your last debate, or can you promise your donors and your voters you're going to be there in a month?
I'm 100% confident that 30 days from now in Alabama, we'll be hanging out having a conversation about, wow, Tim, you're actually on the stage. Of course I'll be on the stage. We're not running a national campaign. We're running a campaign state by state. That's how these campaigns actually work. If you think back to 2011 and 2015, it was Herman Cain and the 999. Winning in Iowa right now, 2015, it was Ben Carson. So what we know is that the voters are just turning their attention towards this election. I'm very optimistic that we can continue to make gains.
And joining me now is Matt Gorman. He served as senior communications advisor to the Scott campaign. And Matt, first of all, you're here in D.C. and you were not with the candidate, I'm guessing. When did you find out about what was going down, and what can you tell us about how this decision came together?
As I understand it, I think he took the weekend. He had the flu late last week. He canceled some Iowa events, and he took the weekend. And excuse me, he was. I think he kind of took stock. He was able to see that the path that he hoped was there wasn't there as much anymore. And I mean, Garrett, you and I have done these quite a bit. It's a slog.
Yeah.
And you need to really wake up every day believing that you have a clear path to presidency. And I think that path he realized had narrowed. And so I think that is the realization, and that's how he came to his decision, which, look, is a very personal one, too.
Absolutely. How much do you think changed between Wednesday night and today? I mean, he was so confident coming out of that debate. I think a lot of observers didn't feel like he fundamentally changed the direction things were going on Wednesday night. Did that play into it? I mean, walk me through some more of that.
Look, I think what you saw on Wednesday was a very authentic Tim Scott. I think, you know, from what I had heard, he felt his most at ease, as if any debate he had so far was that debate on Wednesday night with you all.
Well, you and I talked about the idea before the debate that this is never somebody who's going to come out and, like, throw haymakers. It would have been fundamentally un-Tim Scott of him to just change who he was in what ultimately ended up being his last debate.
I think what he entered this campaign with, and I think he's leaving it, he wanted to make sure that his reputation, his good name, was still intact. And I think what he had seen from other folks where that wasn't the case, where they turned into something they weren't. They weren't authentic to themselves. And I think no matter what, win or lose, he had said this repeatedly, he was going to stay who he was. And I think that's what we saw Wednesday.
Nomney mentioned this a little bit. In poll after poll, he would always come out with these super high favorables. Voters everywhere loved him, but not enough to vote for him. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think they were able to get to know him. They liked him. You know, if you and I saw him in small town halls, this is a guy from North Charleston, South Carolina. He'd go to rural Iowa and connect with people. I also think that candidly, the electorate wasn't necessarily too enthused for an optimistic, positive message at this time. Doesn't mean it's forever, as you kind of heard him on Fox, but at least right now, doesn't seem to be the case.
Do you think him dropping out says more about Tim Scott or more about Donald Trump?
I think it says about Tim Scott, and I mean that in a good way. I think he realized that this wasn't going to happen. He wasn't going to belabor it, and he believes that, look, at least over half of the GOP, around half, want an alternative to Donald Trump. We believe we were the best positioned to be that alternative. Now, if somebody else is going to come and be the alternative, they have that opportunity to without it crowding.
Does he think there is still room for an alternative, or is part of this decision to get out a realization that nobody's going to knock off this guy this cycle?
I haven't talked to him about this, but what I think is this race is pretty fluid still. I mean, as he's kind of said in that clip, right? We were talking about Herman Cain at one point, where, you know, Rick Santorum was not on the radar at this point in 2012. So I think things can be fluid, not just in Iowa, but as we kind of continue down the calendar.
Tim Scott said on the trail often that he didn't think Donald Trump could win. Does he do anything to affect Donald Trump winning or losing now as not a candidate? And by that I mean, do you think he endorses? Do you think he campaigns against the former president in some capacity? Or is he going to the sidelines for this race?
I think he's going to take some time, first of all. I take him at his word that he's not going to endorse right away. And look, again, I think we cannot overstate how arduous and how personal these things become, right? And so I think it's not unexpected for, you know, within either A, when you sit down and have this interview, or within 24 hours to have it all figured out. I take him at his word, though. He doesn't plan on endorsing, at least right now. And I think he's still in the Senate for a couple of years. He might be the chairman of the banking committee. We haven't heard the last of Tim Scott, but I think we give some time to have him figured out.
I think that sounds right. Matt Gorman, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your work. I'm sure we'll have you back soon. All right, up next, it's crunch time for Congress and the biggest test yet for Speaker Mike Johnson, with just 4 more days to go until a potential government shutdown. We're live on the Hill with the very latest next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We're now just 4 days away from a government shutdown, and lawmakers have to act quickly to get a funding bill through both chambers. Newly elected House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled a 2-tiered continuing resolution this weekend that would not include any funding for Israel. The plan is already facing some opposition by members of both parties in the House, and it'll likely be an uphill climb in the Senate as well. On Meet the Press yesterday, Senate Democrat Chris Murphy told Kristen Welker he's not entirely sold on this solution, but he's willing to be convinced.
I don't like this laddered CR approach. It looks gimmicky to me, but I'm open to what the House is talking about. The priority has to be keeping the government open, and I think this is a moment where reasonable people in the Senate, and that's where most of the reasonable people are these days, have to make sure that we are not making the perfect the enemy of the good. I don't like what the House is talking about, but I'm willing to listen.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has the latest on efforts to avert a shutdown. And Ryan, help us understand exactly what the speaker is even trying to do here. He went to a party of people who don't like CRs and said, instead of 1, I'll give you 2. I mean, what happens here and how's this going to play out?
Yeah, you get the sense, Garrett, that he's trying to thread a very narrow needle here, try and come up with something that he knows can get the support of Democrats in the Senate and the White House, and even maybe a couple of Democrats in the House of Representatives, but one that won't completely alienate the conservative wing of his base to the point where they do to him what they did to Kevin McCarthy. And so by coming up with this, and I think Senator Murphy's description of it, somewhat gimmicky idea of a two-tiered continuing resolution with basically two separate expirations dates, maybe fits that mold. He's trying to demonstrate to his conservative colleagues that this isn't business as usual. They're not just going to rubber stamp a whole round of additional funding for a short period of time and keep kicking the can down the road. I hate that analogy, but that's something that is set up here often. And instead trying to do things just a little bit differently. And hopefully that little bit differently is enough to keep those conservatives at bay. Of course, 7 or so have already said they're not going to vote for this. It's going to require Democrats to get it over the finish line. The question is, Garrett, can he find that Goldilocks approach where it's just enough Democrats and just enough Republicans where he doesn't alienate those that would be willing to maybe topple him over these negotiations? Yeah,
it's been very interesting to watch Democrats bash this bill but leave open the possibility they might vote for it. It's like they don't want to upset the apple cart here, too. But, Ryan, let's talk about what's not in this. This bill does not include any of the funding the White House has asked for Israel or Ukraine. It doesn't include the budget cuts that House conservatives have wanted. Talk to me about the extra money, the foreign aid money here, because there's going to be a lot of concern that if this doesn't ride along on something that has to pass now, it might never pass, right?
It's so true, Garrett. I mean, by no means does this solve any of the problems here on Capitol Hill. At the very least, it pushes off maybe a quarter of what they have to deal with into the new year, but leaves a whole host of other issues that are left unresolved. And the supplemental aid package that the White House sent over that includes funding for Israel, Ukraine, border security, Taiwan, all of that is still a very much an open question. It's something that the Senate is very much in favor of, and Senate Republicans and Democrats are actively negotiating, but the House really appears to have no path forward in that regard. Certainly, they did pass an Israel supplemental package that was filled with a poison pill of cuts to the R-S program as well that just has no hope of ever passing the Senate. So after they clear this short-term spending package, if they're able to clear this short-term spending package, that's when the real negotiating is going to start. First on that collection of aid packages, and then the longer-term discussion about how the government will be funded into the new year. These are all very difficult questions, and there is really no clear path to finding some sort of resolution that can pass both the House and Senate and be signed by President Biden.
Complicated times with a new guy at the tiller. Ryan Nobles, thank you for that reporting. And I'm joined now by Republican Congressman from Tennessee, Tim Burchett. Congressman, you told us last week you wanted to see what was in a CR before you weighed in on it. This bill's been out since Saturday, so weigh in on it. How do you feel about it?
Well, it is just what it says. It's a continuation, and I feel like I'd like to give Speaker Johnson every benefit, but I don't feel like it's one that I could vote for because it is just a continuation of the bad policies that we've had. And there's no, as was mentioned, there's no savings, there's no border protection in there, but I want to give this speaker every chance he needs. The CR was created, I guess 30 years ago or so, and it's for an emergency situation. So really, our ambulance system, so to speak, has become our public transportation in America. And we've avoided passing a budget. And the reason we do that is so that special interests and the lobbyists are taken care of, and the American public doesn't see it until after it's passed. So at some point, we're going to have to bring up Jody Arrington, who chairs our budget committee, and look at passing a budget, which is something we haven't done in 30 years. But Congressman Mike Johnson, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Congressman, surely you knew when you voted to get rid of Kevin McCarthy and the House had no speaker for a month that you were going to probably end up with another CR because you had taken up all the available time to legislate with just picking a leader so you could function again, right?
Yeah, except one thing is that we took off the entire month of August and 2 weeks into September, knowing that September 30th was the end of the fiscal year. So, we were just trying to they tried to cram something down our throats, and Mike Johnson is not doing that. This is, as I stated, this is an emergency situation. This is his only thing he can get through. You couldn't craft a budget in this amount of time. So.
Well, given that,
I give him a little leeway, but I still don't support continued I think it's bad policy.
Does a little leeway mean you'd vote for the rule? You'd let this come to the floor and let the chips fall where they may?
I think so, yeah. I think I would vote for the rule.
All right, so you don't like it, but you don't not like it enough to try to block it from getting a chance to pass.
No, and I don't think there's any movement afoot at all to remove Mike Johnson. I mean, if it was, I would probably know about it since I was one of the 8 that was involved in that.
Yeah, you got ahead of me there a little bit. I mean, obviously, this is the kind of thing that, this was the last straw, basically, for a number of you folks who voted against McCarthy. I mean, how much is there anger in the conference at Mike Johnson for this? He ran internally on the fact that you guys would have to do a CR at some point, right? Does that buy him a little bit of goodwill to navigate this period?
Yeah, he was honest with us. We've talked about how we're having single spending bills, and we're actually the appropriations, although a lot of them are full of a bunch of garbage. We're breaking them down, and there's amendments that are being allowed to be debated, although they're defeated by the hierarchy in both parties because they don't want to cut the gravy train off. But I get that. But he is being honest about it, and he's going about it in a forthright manner, and I trust him.
I read this bill, all 32 pages of it, not a lot there. There's nothing in here for Israel. For a Congress that talks a lot about supporting one of our most important allies, I don't see this Congress passing a lot of support for one of our most important allies.
We already did. We already passed a bill for Israel, and we sent it to the Senate, and it's disingenuous of the Senate to say that we're not going to do anything when, in fact, we've done it, and they chose not to take it up, and they chose not to vote on it. So I take a step back on all those statements when I hear that because, in fact, I don't feel like that's accurate.
All right, that's fair. So you feel that is kind of like a take it or leave it for a Senate then? It's sort of up to them to pass something before you guys can move forward on what a plan B might be?
Sure, and I think it's disingenuous of the White House when they say that we've, they're just playing politics over there in the House. And, well, what's attaching it to the bill to Ukraine and a bunch of bogus border security and a little bit for Taiwan. He's tying up all these things. He knows Ukraine is a hot button in the House, and so he attaches the funding to Israel. And also Israel, as we spoke to them, they're not. Our funding is not a dire situation for them right now. They get over $3 billion, as you know, a year. It's pretty much an auto check system. Their missile defense system, the Iron Dome, we've sent them over two allotments of it that we had, and we've sent out the largest carrier fleet in the world is in the Mediterranean right now. Over 12 ships and now submarines are there in a support role. So America is serious about their support of Israel.
Congressman, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about something that happened last week with the elections and the issue of abortion in the Republican Party. I want to play something that R-S.C. Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel said to Kristen Welker yesterday and ask you about it right afterwards. Listen to this.
We have to talk compassionately. We can't attack women. We also have to define ourselves before the Democrats define us. And this is my #1 message. If you're digging yourself out of a hole, you're going to lose. But if you go on TV and you say to the American people, listen, we all are passionate about this issue, and it's confusing right now. But in a time of consensus, can't we agree on reasonable limitations at 15 weeks when a baby feels pain? I think there's a lot of discussion to be had, but we can't just say it's a state's issue and be done.
Abortion is going to be a huge issue again next year. You're going to be on the ballot next year. What do you make of what your chairwoman said about that? And how do you feel like Republicans need to address what's obviously become an albatross nationally as an electoral issue?
Well, she doesn't necessarily speak for me, and I am pro-life, and I come from a state that's very pro-life, Tennessee, of course. But it's been the law of the land for 30 plus years. So that's what we've lived under. I don't know what we expected was going to happen. All of a sudden, we turned the law over, and then everybody who's lived under it and had the convenience of an abortion on demand was going to automatically just turn around and say, oh, great, well, I'm not for it anymore because of what the Supreme Court ruled. In fact, it's now a states' rights issue, and it's in the states. It's in the state legislatures, and that's where I feel like it should be.
All right, Congressman Burchett, we will leave it there. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, brother. It's always a pleasure.
You got it. After the break, we'll get the view on government funding and Israel aid from the other side of the aisle. Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley joins me next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. And moments ago, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor expressed a certain openness to viewing this two-tiered solution to a possible government shutdown that the House Speaker has been proposing. But of course, it has to get through the House before the Senate gets any say in that. And someone who'll get a say on it perhaps as early as tonight or tomorrow is Democratic Congressman from Illinois, Mike Quigley, who joins me now. He's been pushing hard for aid to Ukraine and Israel to be included in these funding bills. So let me just start with this two-tiered CR. We're banning the phrase laddered on this program here. Have you read it yet, and what are your initial thoughts?
First of all, we shouldn't be here. We had a bipartisan bicameral agreement in June, put the top lines into a spending bill.
I remember.
So now we again play a brinksmanship game with the American economy and everything that goes with that. Just recently, Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit rating outlook from stable to negative based on this kind of dysfunction. So we shouldn't be here in the first place. And now we have Hobson's choices that make no sense whatsoever. So is there a preference on which one? They're all degrees of bad, and the unfortunate victims are the American people.
Well, Congressman, if it's this or shutdown, though, I mean, would you vote for this plan if it comes to the floor tomorrow?
Look, if it's this or shutdown, you have to vote not to shut the government down. I just don't want people to think that this is a choice that we should have to be having at this point in time, given the circumstances last June.
Right. So is that the concern? Is part of the concern then, I guess, the idea that you sort of set a precedent here that now we're going to have these levels of shutdown votes every month or two for as long as it takes to pass a year-long government funding, and who knows how long that could take?
We've created two fiscal cliffs. I mean, we just avoided devastating the American economy and maybe worldwide markets in June by raising the debt ceiling. And what we did, and we put off because Speaker McCarthy, I think in an effort to save his gavel, went to appease, again, the extreme far right of the Republican Party. This isn't the tail wagging the dog. It's the tip of the dog's tail wagging the body politic. And I suspect that Speaker Johnson thinks he can play the same game. This is a divided government. And the Republicans kick speakers out when they compromise. It is the nature of what gets done in this government. So if Speaker Johnson actually gets to a final bill where we fund the government for a full year, he's probably going to lose his gavel. So the decision is he willing to do that now or put it off till later? It is inevitable.
Well, I guess you could argue that in a body where governing only happens when there's a crisis or a cliff, what you need are more crises to get more governing. But I know that's not a road anybody really wants to go down. I'm curious, the lack of aid in here for Israel or Ukraine. I don't know if you heard my interview with Tim Burchett, but he made the argument that the House has passed Israel aid, whether you like the way they did it or not, notwithstanding. But how worried are you that these 4 to 8 elements that the White House has asked for, that you've advocated for, aren't in here and might not ever see the light of day if they're not tied to something like a government funding bill?
Well, the first risk I mentioned was to the American economy. I think the second risk here is the world is watching us, our allies and our adversaries, and they're saying they simply can't govern. And I think that really tests our will. It makes them start to question if we'll be there when it matters. I was recently in Ukraine, and while they're extraordinarily supportive and appreciative of what we've done to help them, they're starting to look at us like, are you going to be there? Fiona Hill wrote a couple of years ago about how this dysfunction, this extraordinary polarization, is a national security risk. I think we're starting to see that play out. We have to get this done. It makes no sense other than playing to a political extremist group not to put this all together and not wait to the last second to do it. Are we going to ask the Ukrainians and the Israelis to start rationing what they do in an extraordinarily important pivotal point in their conflicts? It's dangerous to them. It's dangerous to our credibility.
I was surprised recently to read even Mitch McConnell, who's been as vocal of an advocate for Ukraine aid as anybody out there, and I think you'd probably agree with that statement, has kind of backed off, saying that, it's not going to be him who gets this over the finish line. How does this happen? Does the president need to do more? Do other Republicans need to lean on Mike Johnson more? Like, how does this get done? Because this issue seems almost unbreakably stuck from where I sit.
Well, it can get done. I think there's very real concerns here that this isn't our father's Republican Party, right? What was the Reagan doctrine? That we would support our allies against Russian aggression as strong as we have to, as long as we have to. When there was a standalone vote to support Ukraine a couple weeks ago, it lost in the Republican caucus, 117 to 101. The Reagan doctrine of all things is dead in the Republican Party. So Democrats voted unanimously. If a bill supporting Ukraine and Israel came to the floor, it would pass 3-1 in the House. But it's just a question of the political will and leadership to put it there.
Well, you might need the Senate to do it first at this rate. Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks for coming on and for sharing your expertise with us. And still to come, trumped-up rhetoric. The former president compares his perceived political enemies to literal vermin in a raucous and at times unsettling Veterans Day rally. Those comments and the fallout are next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Donald Trump's business practices and political rhetoric are both front and center again today. For the second time in 3 weeks, his son, Donald Trump Jr., was back on the stand in a civil fraud case brought by the New York Attorney General, testifying this time as the defense begins to make its case. At the same time, the Trump campaign is defending comments the former president made at a rally on Saturday in which he compared his political opponents to vermin, drawing comparisons to language used by dictators like Hitler and Mussolini.
In honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
My colleague Vaughn Hilliard joins me now from outside the courthouse in Manhattan. And Vaughn, I'm trying to figure out if there's any possible context that could support comments like those. What was he talking about?
No, there is no context, Garrett, to those comments other than this is a former president of the United States and leading candidate for president of the United States in 2024 who has vowed to go after and prosecute his political enemies. Garrett, you are very familiar that this is a line that we have heard Donald Trump use, especially over the last 18 months on the campaign trail. But the use of the word vermin was an explicit addition here this weekend when talking about his political enemies and the danger from within. It's important context. You noted the authoritarian leaders of generations past, but it was explicit Nazi propaganda that was used with the use of the word vermin. For Donald Trump, I will read you a quote from his spokesman here, who to NBC said, quote, "Those who try to make that ridiculous assertion are clearly snowflakes grasping for anything because they are suffering from the Trump derangement syndrome, and their sad, miserable existence will be crushed when President Trump returns to the White House." I'll repeat that last part. Their miserable existence will be crushed when President Trump returns to the White House. Garrett.
Yeah, there's nothing that says I'm not an authoritarian, like having your spokesperson threaten to crush people out of existence. Vaughn, you are outside the courthouse today where the former president's son was testifying again today. What did he have to say for himself?
This was the second time that Don Jr. has testified, but this time under the questioning, Garrett, of his own defense lawyer. This is essentially the kickoff of the second half of this trial. The prosecution rested their case after Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump testified last week, and now it's up to the defense to bring forward their witnesses here in the weeks ahead. We expect the defense to close their case come December 15th, so this is just the beginning. But what you heard from Don Jr. today was him going property by property, explaining the intricacies case of why, in his own words, those properties were spectacular and the value of which they were assessed are accurate. In multiple situations, he makes the case that they were undervalued. For Don Jr. and his family, who are defendants here in this case, part of this is making the case here to the judge, who will be the one to determine the extent to which he and his brother Eric and father are liable in this civil lawsuit from the New York Attorney General. He was the one who signed the financial records asserting that they were in fact accurate. But he, again today, suggesting that it was the part of the accountants that he relied on for the minutia of those actual financial reports, Garrett.
And obviously, they're making legal arguments to the judge here, but the Trump defense has also been making political arguments for his campaign. Do you think there's any shot we see Donald Trump on the witness stand again as part of his own defense here?
He very well could be. He has already been found liable on the one claim here, and Don Jr. said on the way out that they have no choice but to appeal not only that claim, but potentially rulings against them on these other claims here. And for them, what they have the opportunity to do on the witness stand right now, as Don Jr. did for more than 4 hours today, and what Donald Trump could very well do if he were to take the stand again, is lay out a case that could be used in an ultimate appeal trial, Garrett. What they say on the stand here would be pertinent, therefore, to the appeal, which gives them credence to go back to the stand for a second go.
Got it. All right, Von Hilliard, thank you for your reporting. And thank you all for being with us this hour. I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Aaron Gilchrist in for Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.